that we share today, America and China are joined at the bank. Is it troubling to you that our democracy is tied to their form of government through the financing system that props up our democracy right now?
Well, right, they're buying a lot of T-bills and we're buying a lot of their products. But, you know, look, this question may look very different in 5 or 10 years. I would much rather be advising the President of the United States than whoever runs China, because I think the former has fewer problems on his plate than the latter's going to have. I mean, I think the notion that China's got some sort of perpetual motion machine here, it may be wrong, even if you leave morality aside and just consider it as a functioning autocracy. You know, I have no idea what we're going to see in the next 5 to 10 years, and we may see a lot of, you know, stuff that might make civil war look like a picnic.
China is no longer presents the civil war within is over in the sense that the battle between communism and democracy was a sort of civil war within the West. Communism, even though the Chinese Communist Party is still the gang in charge in China, communism is dead. The notion that there's some kind of new man going to be created, or that this is some historical inevitability about communism and this dictatorship of the proletariat, which would lead to the withering away. That whole ideology is junk, even in China, and the Chinese Communist Party is simply, you know, a very well-dressed, necktie-wearing mafia that controls the country, and there's got a lot of enlightened people there, no doubt, and they've got a lot of smart technocrats and everything. But at some point, it's going to become an unviable. It's a sort of inherently unstable situation. Ours is becoming unstable, I think, because of for legitimacy reasons that our government, the structure we have, works so poorly, is so bad at the machine is breaking down to the point where it lacks legitimacy. I think that's one of the reasons why there's so much mania for polls here, where if we have a representative government, then we don't really, that works, then polls are interesting, but we don't need polls. Polls don't have, here it's as if the polls have, people speak of the polls as if that is a higher kind of, more legitimate piece of information than who has a majority in the elected legislature. And I think that speaks to problems of legitimacy in our democracy, as does the declining rates of voter participation and all of that.
Colleen, have you got a question on your side?
Thank you. My name is Carol Houle, and I appreciate your verbal civility very much, the two of you. I'm impressed by that. And the question...
Probably get into something more.
I hope so. But my question follows a bit on this thing on China. It's not on China. It's on the general foreign policy of the U.S. I spent 37 years abroad in other countries, in third world countries. And we're not viewed by most of third world countries in a very favorable light. We're seen kind of like as an economic empire, without the empire being a nice term. Pablo Casals once said, "The love of one's country is a splendid thing, but why should love stop at the border?" And that seems to be, I guess, my question too, why we have globalization. Why can't we have, but what do you think? This is my view. But what do you think that could be done, or should be done? Are you just happy with our foreign policy at present?
Well, that's, in terms of love stopping at the border, I think borders are good. And I think the nation state can be a locus for a lot of good. I mean, we all know the bad that it generated in the 20th century. but it can also give people a sense of commonality. It can help people draw together at times. And I think to try and push those feelings beyond the borders of nation states is tricky and probably futile. They're trying to do that in Europe. I don't think it's going to work. I think the European Union is kind of a monstrous birth. Comparisons of it with the Constitutional Convention, I strike me as fantastic. I think they're seeing some of the technocratic consequences of that now with Greece's financial problems and how are they going to be bailed out. And it's not just Greece, I mean Spain, Italy, or maybe next. And but those are technical problems. But in terms of the fellow feeling that Europeans are supposed to have for each other, it strikes me as nonsensical. I just don't see it, and I don't see how you could produce it or how you could generate it. God knows the 13 colonies and the 13 states were much more diverse than many states in the United States today are from each other, but they had more in common, much more in common than the nations of the European Union.
Well, in theory, as a knee-jerk liberal, in theory, I do believe in world government. And I admire the European experiment. Certainly, if you look at the history of Europe before the last 30 years or so, it's pretty scary compared to since then. I mean, we've had peace in Europe for the most part, certainly within the European Union. The European Union is kind of like the Articles of Confederation, I guess. It's and I hope that at some point, the problem of the European Union as a government is again, it lacks legitimacy for good reasons. It lacks legitimacy. It hasn't earned legitimacy. So it doesn't command the loyalty, even the intellectual loyalty of most of its citizens. But we should be. I think we should be trying to expand the circle of kinship more any way we can around the world. I guess the country that a country's development is going to be really interesting and scary is India, which is sort of more like Europe. It is like Europe in the sense of being so diverse and having so many language groups like Europe. It's much more diverse than either Europe or the U.S., or about as diverse as Europe. And it does seem to be kind of galumphing along anyway. But I do worry. I worry about the future of Indian democracy for some of the same reasons I worry about ours, and it's those mechanisms. It is stuck with an 18th century model too, the way we are, and it's really hard to change that model because the people, as you suggested, this gentleman over here, the people who would have to do the changing are the ones who are most benefited from the model that exists in the status quo.